What happens when one of Hollywood's most explosive actors collides with a morning show host who thinks he can play hardball? What happens when raw, untamed intensity faces off against polished plastic television charm? Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Tom Hardy to completely lose it on live television. The result is a live broadcast so charged with tension that it feels less like an interview and more like a heavyweight fight. And in this case, the cameras captured every second of a meltdown that was as scandalous as it was riveting. Tom Hardy walked onto the Good Morning America set with that familiar quiet storm aura. Understated clothes, a simple black jacket, but eyes that burned with the kind of fire that said he wasn't in the mood for games. He had come to talk about his latest film, but you could already sense the air thickening with something else entirely. Across from him sat George Stephanopoulos, radiating that polished grin morning hosts perfect after years of training. Too smooth, too practiced, almost artificial. The set sparkled with lights and artificial calm, but Hardy's jaw tightened the second George spoke. "Tom, thanks for joining us this morning," George began. That television smile stretched across his face. "Your new film is getting incredible reviews, but I want to talk about something else first." It was the type of line that might sound innocent to an untrained ear, but to Hardy, it was a signal that something darker was brewing. He shifted just slightly in his seat, a flicker of movement so small that only those watching closely would notice, and answered carefully, "Sure, George, what's on your mind?" That's when Stephanopoulos dropped the ambush. Leaning in as if about to deliver some great revelation, he said, "There's been some controversy surrounding your comments about method acting and mental health. Some critics are saying you've been irresponsible in how you approach your craft." In an instant, the atmosphere shifted from a polite morning chat to something far more sinister. The camera zoomed on Hardy, catching the sharp change in his expression, the way his eyes narrowed, the way the entire energy of the interview hardened into steel. This wasn't the conversation he had been brought there for, and now the game had begun. "Irresponsible," Hardy repeated the word slowly, tasting it as though it were poison. His tone was calm, even measured, but behind it was the unmistakable edge of a man who had no intention of letting such a charge slide. "That's an interesting word choice, George. Care to elaborate?" It was a line delivered with the sharp precision of a knife, and Stephanopoulos, perhaps too confident in his position, pressed on as though he had Hardy cornered. "Several mental health advocates have criticized your recent interviews where you discussed diving deep into dark psychological spaces for your roles," George explained, still wearing that half-smile. "They're saying you're glamorizing dangerous behavior." That's when Hardy's posture shifted again, his Birmingham accent sharpening slightly as his irritation became visible. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving George's. "And you agree with them?" he asked quietly. The tension was suffocating, the kind of moment when the audience holds its breath because they know something is about to ignite. But George pushed harder, convinced he was the one in control. "I'm asking the questions here, Tom. What do you say to parents who might be concerned about young actors following your example?" For a few beats, there was silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Hardy just stared, unblinking, letting the moment drag on until it felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he spoke, and the words cut straight through the facade. "Parents should be concerned about morning show hosts who do zero research before ambushing their guests with loaded questions based on secondhand gossip." The response landed like a grenade. For the first time, George's smile faltered, the mask slipping just enough for viewers at home to notice. "Tom, I don't think that's fair. We're just trying to have an honest conversation," he stammered, trying to hold on to the illusion of control. But Hardy was already on the offensive, his laugh sharp and humorless. "Honest? George, mate, if you wanted an honest conversation, you'd have mentioned this line of questioning to my publicist. You'd have done your homework instead of reading talking points off a teleprompter. But that's not what this is it?" The audience could feel the storm building, the undertow pulling them deeper into a spectacle that had already spun out of morning television's comfort zone. Hardy's calm mask barely slipped, but the sharpness in his eyes gave away the fire building underneath. The audience could feel it too. The way the atmosphere thickened, the way the entire studio seemed to hold its breath as Hardy's stare locked onto Stephanopoulos. George tried to lean on the safety of his cue cards, but Hardy wasn't playing by the morning show rules anymore. His voice, low but firm, pressed back. "Your viewers deserve better than this tabloid garbage masquerading as journalism. Tell me, George, when was the last time you actually researched method acting? When did you sit down with a mental health professional and discuss the benefits of exploring dark emotions in a safe, controlled environment? Or are you just parroting headlines?" That was the moment it became clear. Hardy wasn't going to let this go. Stephanopoulos shifted uneasily in his chair, trying to cling to the illusion of authority. "Tom, I think you're being defensive here," he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. But Hardy pounced on the word like a predator circling prey. "Defensive?" he repeated with disbelief, his accent cutting sharper now. "George, I came here at 5 in the morning to talk about a film I poured myself into. Instead, you're twisting words out of context and trying to paint me as reckless. That's not defensive. That's called having standards." His words dripped with contempt, yet he delivered them with such precision that every person watching knew this was no ordinary interview. "The quotes speak for themselves," George pushed, his voice brittle. Hardy tilted his head, his expression somewhere between amusement and fury. "Do they? Because I'd love to hear which specific quotes you're referring to. Can you cite them for me, word for word?" He leaned in, eyes narrowed, daring George to back up his accusations with something solid. The silence that followed stretched like an elastic band ready to snap. Stephanopoulos flipped through his notes, papers rustling loudly in the stillness. His hesitation was broadcast in real time, every second of it eating away at his credibility. Finally, George mumbled, "Well, there have been several interviews where you've discussed your intense preparation methods." But Hardy cut him off like a blade. "Several interviews," he repeated slowly, dragging out the words as if exposing them under a spotlight. "But you can't quote a single one specifically, can you? You can't tell me which journalist, which outlet, or which exact words I used. Nothing." His voice was even, but the challenge rang louder than a shout. For the first time, George's composure cracked, his eyes darting to the cameras before back down to the papers in his hands. "Tom, I think we're getting off track here," George attempted, desperate to wrestle the interview back into safer territory. But Hardy wasn't giving him an inch. "No, George," he said firmly, his tone like steel. "We're right on track. You accused me of being irresponsible. You claimed I'm a dangerous influence, and now you can't even back up a single word of it. That's not journalism. That's character assassination." The audience could practically hear the echo in the silence that followed, a silence broken only by the faint hum of studio lights. George shifted uncomfortably, sweat beginning to bead along his forehead. "I have the information right here in my notes," he insisted weakly, trying to salvage the wreckage. Hardy didn't even blink. "Then read it," he demanded, his voice like a command that brooked no refusal. "Read me the exact quote that has you so concerned." The tension in the room was unbearable as George fumbled, eyes darting between his cards and the camera, searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. After what felt like forever, George stammered, "The specific quote isn't as important as the overall pattern of statements." That was the breaking point. Hardy's eyes widened with disbelief as his voice rose, not in a shout, but with the thunder of controlled outrage. "The specific quote isn't important? George, you just spent 5 minutes accusing me on national television of endangering young actors, and now you're saying the actual words don't matter? Do you even hear yourself?" The bite in his voice turned every sentence into a direct strike, and George was visibly shrinking under the weight of it. "That's not what I'm saying," George tried weakly, but Hardy cut him off instantly. "Then what are you saying? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you dragged me here under false pretenses to ambush me with accusations you can't even articulate. That's not journalism, mate. That's a hit job." The audience sat frozen, watching the slow unraveling of a seasoned television host under the relentless pressure of Hardy's glare. George looked down again, his papers now more a shield than a tool. "The concerns have been raised in various media outlets," he said, the words sounding hollow even as they left his mouth. Hardy let the silence hang for a moment before repeating the phrase, back with dripping sarcasm. Various media outlets. George, do you hear yourself? You sound like a politician dodging a scandal. Sources say. It's been reported. These are weasel words, mate. This is how people talk when they're making things up. The audience erupted with muffled reactions, and even the crew seemed unsettled by how far the segment had slipped from control. I'm not making anything up, George said, now visibly sweating through his professional calm. Hardy leaned forward, his voice low and deadly precise. Then prove it, right now, on air. Show me one specific example of what you're talking about. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye in the studio was on George, but he had nothing to offer. No quote, no name, no evidence. He fumbled with his papers again, and the desperation in his movements was obvious. Tom, I think we're spending too much time on this, George finally blurted, his words shaky, his face betraying his panic. But Hardy didn't let up for a second. We're spending exactly the right amount of time on this, he replied coldly. You made serious accusations against my professional character, and now you're trying to run when I'm asking you to back them up. That's not how this works, George. His words were sharper than any script could ever deliver, because they carried the weight of truth. The cameras captured George's face as it cracked under the pressure, his professional veneer shredded in front of millions. George tried to pull himself together, his voice tightening as he clutched at what little control he had left. Nobody's running away from anything, he said, though his eyes betrayed the panic he was trying to hide. But Hardy leaned back slightly, a dangerous calm washing over him. Then stop deflecting and answer the question, he said with cutting precision. One name, one specific quote, one piece of actual evidence for any of the claims you've just made. The studio went silent again, so quiet you could practically hear the air conditioning, the weight of Hardy's demand pressing down like a storm cloud. George shuffled his papers as if some miracle answer might appear, but the truth was written across his face. He had nothing. The host's next line came out trembling, his grip on authority slipping like sand through his fingers. Tom, our research team compiled information from multiple sources. The word sounded hollow, flimsy, almost rehearsed. Hardy didn't miss a beat. Your research team, he repeated slowly, his tone dripping with disdain. Compiled information. George, that's not an answer. That's corporate speak. You're hiding behind your producers the same way you're hiding behind these anonymous critics and vague concerns. It's pathetic, mate. You don't have specifics, so you're throwing around words like sources and research team as if they can cover up the fact that you walked into this interview unprepared. The look on George's face said it all. Hardy had him cornered, and there was no way out. Trying desperately to claw back control, George attempted a pivot. Tom, I think our viewers would prefer to hear about your new film. He said it quickly, like a man reaching for a lifeline, but Hardy wasn't about to let him escape. His reply was direct and brutal. Your viewers deserve better than this circus. They deserve hosts who do actual research instead of ambushing their guests with tabloid rumors. They deserve journalists who can back up their questions with facts, not flimsy gossip. You've wasted everyone's time with lies, George, and now you want to move on like nothing happened? That's not how this works. His words were calm, but delivered with such force that George visibly recoiled, his carefully constructed persona cracking further under the weight of the confrontation. You're being very aggressive here, George said, his voice now faint and defensive. But Hardy's response was swift and devastating. I'm being precise, he shot back. There's a difference. You came at me with accusations that could damage my professional integrity, and you expected me to just nod along for your ratings. Now you're upset because I'm asking you to back them up with actual evidence. That's not aggression, George. That's accountability. The word hung in the air like a hammer blow, and the audience sat transfixed, caught between shock and awe at the unraveling spectacle before them. The camera panned to the studio audience, their expressions a mix of disbelief and discomfort. Some looked captivated, others unsettled, but all were glued to the scene unfolding. George made another attempt to redirect. Tom, let's try to have a productive conversation here, he pleaded, his voice now almost breaking. Hardy leaned in, his voice low and sharp, every syllable a dagger. "We could have had a productive conversation if you'd started with honest questions about my work instead of cooked-up controversy. But you chose this approach, so let's see it through." The words landed with such weight that even the crew members in the background looked shaken, exchanging nervous glances as though debating whether to cut to commercial. At this point, George looked like a man on the ropes, scrambling for any angle to salvage what had become a public unraveling. "Tom, I understand you're passionate about your work, but surely you can acknowledge that celebrities have a responsibility when they speak publicly about sensitive topics," he tried, clinging to the idea that he could still reframe the conversation. Hardy's eyes locked on him, unflinching, his response cold and cutting. "Absolutely, George. Celebrities do have a responsibility. Just like journalists have a responsibility to their audience. Just like morning show hosts have a responsibility to prepare properly for their interviews. Just like networks have a responsibility to uphold basic standards of integrity. You talk about responsibility, then start by looking in the mirror." The studio air grew heavier, the tension almost unbearable as Hardy's words echoed with finality. George attempted to fight back, his voice trembling but defiant. "I think we maintain very high standards here," he said, trying to sound authoritative. But Hardy leaned forward, his voice now deadly quiet, every word like a dagger aimed straight at George's credibility. "Do you? Because right now, your audience is watching you make accusations you can't support, ask questions based on research you haven't done, and dodge accountability every time I call you out. Is that the high standard you're so proud of? Because if it is, then this entire industry is in far worse shape than anyone realizes." The weight of that final blow was devastating, and the look on George's face showed the truth. He had no comeback. By now, the polished mask Stephanopoulos had worn at the beginning of the interview was gone. His smile had disappeared, his posture slouched, and sweat dotted his forehead as Hardy relentlessly pressed forward. "Tom, you're being incredibly difficult," George muttered, his words shaky and defensive. Hardy's reaction was immediate and scathing. "Difficult? George, you ambushed me with false accusations on live television, and now you're calling me difficult because I won't let you get away with it? What exactly did you expect would happen here?" His voice rose just slightly, not enough to be a shout, but enough to slice through the room like a blade. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing they were no longer watching a morning interview. They were witnessing a televised reckoning. George tried to regain some sense of control. "I expected a professional conversation," he said stiffly. Hardy didn't even pause before delivering his devastating reply. "Then you should have conducted yourself professionally. You should have done your homework. You should have prepared real questions instead of tabloid gotcha nonsense designed for a cheap viral clip. Don't lecture me on professionalism, George, when you walked into this interview unarmed." The words landed with brutal force, and for a moment, George seemed to shrink into his chair, his authority crumbling piece by piece. The desperation in George's demeanor was obvious now. His eyes darted off camera, silently pleading for his producers to step in, to save him from the storm he had unleashed. "Tom, I think we need to wrap this up," he said finally, his tone wavering. But Hardy leaned forward, refusing to release him. "Oh, now you want to wrap it up? After you've spent 10 minutes dragging my name through the mud with baseless accusations, now you want to move on as if nothing happened? We had limited time, George, and you chose to waste it with lies. That's on you." The audience sat frozen, the energy in the studio like static electricity before a lightning strike. The silence became unbearable, the weight of Hardy's words filling every corner of the set. George, desperate for a way out, tried one last line. "Tom, I'm going to ask you one more time to please tone it down." It was a mistake. Hardy's eyes locked onto him, his voice dropping lower, quieter, but somehow far more menacing. "Tone it down? You just accused me of being a dangerous influence on young actors without a shred of evidence. You questioned my integrity, my craft, my character, and now you're telling me to tone it down? George, there's nothing civil about ambushing someone with lies. There's nothing civil about slandering someone live on air. Don't talk to me about civility when you've shown none." His words carried the finality of a hammer, striking the last nail. The tension boiled over. George, visibly rattled and desperate, blurted out, "Security?" The word echoed in the silent studio, and the audience audibly gasped. Hardy turned his head, his expression a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Security?" he repeated, his voice heavy with contempt. "You're calling security on me for asking you to back up your own questions with facts? This is what journalism has come to?" The studio doors opened, and security began to step forward, moving toward the set. Hardy didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked directly into the camera, his calmness now more powerful than any explosion could be. "This is what modern journalism has become," Hardy said clearly, his voice booming across the airwaves. "When a guest calls out a host for shoddy research and false accusations, the response isn't accountability. It's to call security. Not to admit a mistake, not to correct the record, but to silence the truth." His words sent chills down the spines of everyone in the room. A security guard stepped closer. "Tom, you need to calm down," the guard said. Hardy turned to him, then back to the camera, his voice unwavering. "I'm sitting in this chair, speaking in complete sentences, asking for basic journalistic standards. What exactly do I need to calm down from? From expecting honesty?" The moment crystallized into something unforgettable. George, panicked, shouted again, "Remove him from the set!" Hardy rose slowly from his chair, every movement deliberate, his posture tall and commanding. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice calm but devastating. "For expecting a journalist to back up their accusations? For daring to hold you accountable?" He shook his head in disbelief, scanning the room one last time before turning back to the cameras. "I came here to talk about my work. Instead, I was ambushed, accused, and now I'm being escorted out for defending myself with facts. Viewers, remember this moment. This is what happens when you ask for accountability in modern media." With that, Hardy stood fully, brushing off the hands of security who were hesitant to touch him. He walked off the set under his own power, leaving George slumped in his chair, his face pale, his papers trembling in his hands. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they had just seen heavy in the air. The cameras lingered on George for a few unbearable seconds as he shuffled his notes, his hands visibly shaking, before the network cut abruptly to an unscheduled commercial break. The silence before the cut only magnified the chaos of what had just unfolded. When the broadcast returned later, the damage was already done. Clips of Hardy's takedown spread like wildfire, replayed endlessly across social media, each replay a reminder of how one actor dismantled a polished host with nothing but words and unshakable composure. The morning show had set out to corner Tom Hardy, but instead, it became the stage for one of the most humiliating on-air meltdowns in television history. Hardy hadn't just defended himself, he had exposed the fragility, the emptiness, and the shallow theatrics of modern broadcast journalism in front of millions. It wasn't just an interview gone wrong, it was a reckoning, and George Stephanopoulos would never live it down.